Welcome back to Mr. Terrifying. Tonight I have stories that will stay with you long after it's over. These are called end of summer horror stories, so sit back, turn down the lights, and let's get into it. It was the end of summer when everything happened. You know that strange in-between time, when the heat is still heavy during the day but the evenings start to cool off, and you can feel that quiet shift into fall. For most people, it's a time of winding down. Last trips to the lake, kids going back to school, everyone trying to squeeze in the final bits of freedom before the routine kicks back in. For me, though, the end of that particular summer left a mark I'll never get rid of. I was 21 then. I had just finished a rough semester of community college, and instead of doing something fun with my break, I spent most of it working double shifts at a small diner in rural Oklahoma. It wasn't glamorous, but I needed the money. My parents lived out in the sticks, about a 30-minute drive from town, so every night I'd head back home on those empty county roads. One thing about living out there, you get used to isolation. You get used to the long stretches of nothing but fields and tree lines. And you stop being surprised when you don't see another car for miles. But that isolation, when it turns against you, is the worst feeling in the world. It was late August on one of my last shifts before school started again when it all began. I'd closed the diner at 11 p.m. and was heading home, exhausted. The drive was normal at first, windows cracked, that dry late summer air blowing in. Cicadas buzzing so loud outside it almost felt like they were in the car with me. I turned down County Road 214, a stretch that cuts through a mix of farmland and forest. It was always the darkest part of the drive. No houses, no lights, just my headlights carving a narrow path through the black. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something up ahead on the shoulder. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, but as I slowed down, it was clear it was a person. A man standing by a beat-up truck, hood popped open. Now, stopping for strangers at night wasn't something I normally did, but out there, people usually helped each other. It's not like the city. If you break down on those back roads, you could be stranded for hours. So I pulled over. The guy looked to be in his 30s, tall, wiry, with greasy hair that stuck to his forehead. He had this restless energy about him, pacing around the front of the truck. When I stepped out and asked if he needed help, he looked up at me with this strange half-smile. "Saw you coming," he said. "Knew you'd stop." That line, it stuck with me. Not "thanks for stopping," not "yeah, my truck died." Just "I knew you'd stop." I tried to shake it off. I asked what was wrong, and he said something about the engine overheating. I looked into the hood, though I didn't really know what I was doing. The whole time I felt him standing a little too close behind me, like he was watching my every move. After a minute, I told him I wasn't a mechanic, but I could give him a ride to town, or at least let him use my phone to call someone. That's when he leaned in a bit and his voice dropped low. "Nah," he said. "I don't want to go to town." Something in me tensed. I can't explain why, but it was like every nerve in my body was screaming at once. I pulled my phone from my pocket anyway, unlocked it, and held it out to him. He didn't take it. Instead, he tilted his head, still smiling that odd smile. "You from around here?" he asked. I said yeah, and that seemed to light something up in his eyes. He nodded slowly, almost to himself, then finally said, "Guess it's my lucky night." That was enough. I backed up toward my car, telling him I was sorry I couldn't help more. He didn't try to stop me, just stood there grinning in the glow of my headlights as I got back behind the wheel and drove off. For the rest of the ride, my chest was tight. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see his truck creeping along behind me, but the road stayed empty. When I finally got home, I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, and told myself it was just some weirdo I'd never see again. I was wrong. 2 nights later, I was closing up the diner again. It was almost midnight when I left, and the second I turned onto County Road 214, my stomach dropped. Parked on the shoulder in almost the exact same spot was that same truck. Hood popped, lights off. I didn't slow down this time, I just drove past, staring straight ahead. Though in my peripheral vision I could see him standing there. And I caught the glint of his teeth and another one of those crooked smiles. That night I didn't sleep much. Every noise outside made me jump. The old farmhouse creaked and shifted as it cooled, and each sound put me more on edge. By the 3rd night, I was paranoid enough to ask my manager if I could leave work a little earlier. She let me out around 9:30 while it was still dark but not pitch black. I drove home with my high beams on, tense the entire way. No truck that night, no man. For the first time in days, I felt like maybe I'd been overreacting. But then, the next morning, my dad asked me why I'd left the car parked crooked in the driveway. I told him I hadn't, that I always left it straight. He just shrugged and said, "Well, maybe you were tired." Except I remembered very clearly pulling in, lining up with the gravel edge like I always did. That detail stuck with me all day. That evening before sunset, I went out to grab something from my car, and that's when I noticed it. On the passenger side window, smeared into the thin film of dust and pollen, was the shape of a handprint. Large, too large to be mine. The realization that someone had been close enough to press their hand against my car while I slept. It made me feel sick. I told my parents, but out there nothing short of a break-in gets much attention. My dad just said, probably kids messing around. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Over the next week, little things kept happening. Once I came out of work and found a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Nothing written on it. Just blank. Another time I noticed fresh scratches along the driver's side door, like someone had dragged something sharp across it. Every sign pointed to him. The man on the road. One night I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching outside. I froze in bed listening. The farmhouse was set back from the road with a long dirt driveway. Nobody should have been pulling in that late. I forced myself to look out my window, heart pounding. Down by the tree line, just at the edge of the driveway, I saw the silhouette of a man, tall, thin, standing still facing the house. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. I knew it was him. I grabbed my phone, shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and called 911. By the time a deputy finally arrived, the man was gone. No footprints, no truck, nothing. They said they'd keep an eye on the area, but I could tell they didn't take it too seriously. That was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep. I just sat in my room with the lights on, clutching a baseball bat I'd found in the garage. Every shadow outside looked like him. Every sound felt like a warning. And then, just like that, it stopped. The following nights were quiet. No man on the road, No handprints, no scratches, no figure at the tree line. It was as if he vanished. Summer ended and I went back to school, but I never drove that road again. I took the long way to work, an extra 20 minutes just to avoid that stretch. Even now, years later, I still think about him. That stranger who knew I'd stop. Who smiled like he was in on some secret. Who stood in the dark outside my home and left no trace behind. The end of that summer should have just been the end of a break, a transition back to normal life. But for me, it became a reminder of how thin the line is between ordinary and terrifying. Because the truth is, he never really went away. Not in my head. Every time I walk to my car at night, every time I drive down a lonely stretch of road, I wonder if I'll see that old truck again. Hood popped, lights off, waiting. And if I do, I don't think I'll stop this time. It was the end of summer, right before my senior year of college. That strange in-between time when the nights start to cool down, but the days are still heavy with heat. Most of my friends were already moving back into their dorms or apartments, but I had decided to spend one last week at my family's cabin in northern Michigan. I figured it would be my little retreat before the semester swallowed me whole. Just me, the lake, and a stack of books I'd probably never finish. The cabin isn't anything fancy, just a 2-bedroom wooden place my grandfather built back in the 70s. It sits off a narrow dirt road with maybe 4 other cabins scattered across the woods nearby. In the summers, there's usually people around, families grilling, kids running barefoot down to the lake. But by late August, most of the cabins go dark. People pack up and head back to their lives. That's why I liked it. Peace, quiet. At least that's what I thought I was getting. The first couple of days were exactly what I wanted. I went swimming during the afternoons, grilled hot dogs for dinner, and fell asleep reading on the screened porch, the cicadas buzzing in the trees. But by the third night, something felt off. It's hard to explain. You know how sometimes silence feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you? That's how it felt. The woods that usually rang with crickets and frogs were strangely still. I remember sitting on the porch that night with a beer waiting for the sounds to kick in, but they never did. Just this thick, uncomfortable quiet. When I finally went inside, I double-checked the locks on all the doors. I don't usually bother at the cabin, nobody really comes out that way, but for some reason it felt necessary. The next morning I noticed something weird. There were boot prints in the dirt by the side of the cabin, not mine. I hadn't worn boots. These were heavy, deep prints like someone had been pacing back and forth. I tried to brush it off. Maybe one of the neighbors had come by to check on the place, though I didn't know why they wouldn't just knock. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I decided to drive into town that afternoon just for a change of scenery. It's a tiny place, one gas station, a diner, and a hardware store. While I was paying for some groceries, I casually asked the cashier if anyone else was still staying out by the lake. She shook her head. "Nope, you're probably the last one." Something about the way she said it stuck with me. The last one. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing small noises outside the cabin. Not footsteps, more like faint crunches, twigs snapping here and there. Around midnight, I finally got up and looked out the front window. The yard was empty, lit only by the moon. I stared into the tree line for a long time, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. Just that same heavy silence. I told myself I was being paranoid, but then, as I was about to step away, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The shed door. I always keep it padlocked, but now it was slightly ajar. I went outside with a flashlight, heart pounding. The door creaked when I pulled it open. Inside, the shelves were messy, tools knocked over, boxes shifted around. Like someone had been searching for something. I backed out quickly, relocked the shed, and went inside, my hands shaking. I barely slept that night, every creak of the cabin setting me on edge. By morning, I'd convinced myself I needed to leave. Maybe it was nothing, maybe I was overreacting, but the thought of spending another night there made my skin crawl. I packed my bag, locked up, and started driving down the dirt road. About a mile out, I saw something that made my chest tighten. A truck, parked just off the road, angled into the trees. Rusty red, old-looking with no plates. I slowed down as I passed, glancing inside. The cab was empty, but the driver's door was open, like whoever had been in it had just stepped out. I pressed harder on the gas after that, not wanting to stick around. The strange thing was, when I came back from town later that afternoon, the truck was gone. That evening, the unease was unbearable. I locked every door and window before the sun even set. I kept the lights on, every room glowing. But when the power cut out around 10 o'clock, my heart dropped straight into my stomach. I sat at the pitch-black cabin listening. And then from outside, the crunch of gravel. This time I wasn't imagining it. Someone was walking down the driveway. I grabbed the heavy flashlight and crept to the window. At first I didn't see anything. Then, just at the edge of the trees, I caught a glimpse of movement. A figure standing perfectly still facing the cabin. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After what felt like forever, I forced myself to back away from the window. I reached for my phone, but of course no service. I decided to make a run for my car. I slipped out the back door as quietly as I could, my flashlight beam trembling across the yard. The woods loomed dark around me, the silence broken only by the pounding of my heart. When I reached my car, I unlocked it as fast as I could and climbed inside. That's when I saw it. On the windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was a piece of paper. My hands shook as I pulled it free. In messy black marker, it said, "You shouldn't be here." I didn't wait. I started the engine and tore out of the driveway, the gravel spitting under my tires. I drove all the way into town, parked under the bright lights of the gas station, and sat there until the sky turned pale with dawn. When I finally went back to the cabin later that morning with the sheriff, there was nothing. No footprints, no note, no sign of forced entry. The shed was still locked. The sheriff told me it was probably kids messing around, though his tone didn't sound convincing. But I knew someone had been there. Someone had been watching me. I never stayed another night at that cabin. We sold it the following year, and I haven't been back since. But every August, when the air turns heavy and the woods grow quiet, I remember those boot prints by the cabin. I remember the truck with no plates. I remember that figure standing still at the edge of the trees. And most of all, I remember the note. "You shouldn't be here." Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a monster or something you can't explain. It's the fact that someone somewhere decided that your life was just entertainment for them. And the end of summer will always remind me of that. I always hated how quickly summer ends. It's about something that happened years ago, something I've never been able to shake. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind where everybody knows everyone else. That summer I was 19, too old for high school, too young to know anything about life. I was working part-time at a gas station, saving up to leave for college, while most of my friends were already gone. The town felt emptier than usual. Nights dragged on, quiet and restless. That's probably why I said yes when my buddy Ryan suggested we take one last late-night drive before the summer officially ended. He said we'd head out toward the old quarry, park near the water, and just hang out like we used to in high school. It sounded harmless, familiar. I wish I could go back and stop myself from getting in that car. We left just before midnight. Ryan picked me up in his beat-up Chevy, windows down, music blasting. I remember leaning my head out the window, feeling the warm night air rushing past my face, thinking, this feels like freedom. The road to the quarry was always dark, twisting through the woods, but we knew it well. At least we thought we did. About halfway there, Ryan slowed down. His brights cut across the trees, and I saw something I'll never forget. On the side of the road, a car was pulled over. An old pale blue sedan, maybe from the 80s. Both drivers' side doors were open, front and back. No hazard lights, no movement, just sitting there in the dark, like it had been abandoned seconds before we arrived. Ryan pulled to the side automatically. "Think they need help?" he asked. At first, I didn't want to stop. Something about the scene felt wrong, too staged, too quiet. But Ryan was the kind of guy who couldn't leave a stranded driver alone. So he rolled to a stop a few yards behind the car and killed the music. We got out, calling out a casual, "Hey, everything all right?" Silence. The woods pressed in around us, the hum of crickets suddenly too loud. I remember the smell of damp earth, sharp and wet like it had rained earlier. My stomach felt tight. Ryan walked ahead of me toward the car. His voice was light but hesitant. "Hello?" No answer. I finally followed him, keeping close. The sedan was old and dusty with a cracked rear tail light. The back seat had blankets and fast food wrappers scattered across it like someone had been living in there. The front driver's seat was pushed far back, empty. And then we noticed something. On the ground, just beyond the open driver's door, was a single shoe. A woman's flat, small, dirt smeared across it like it had been stepped out of in a hurry. That's when my gut screamed at me to get back in the car. "Ryan," I said, low, urgent. "Something's not right. Let's just go." But he shook his head, frowning. "What if someone's hurt out here? What if they need help?" He started calling out again, louder this time. "Hey, hello, you okay?" I couldn't explain it, but every instinct told me we weren't supposed to be there. The air felt heavy, pressing on my chest. And then I heard it. Not footsteps, not voices, just movement. A quick rustle in the trees across the road, like someone ducking down, trying to stay hidden. I froze. My skin went cold. Ryan didn't hear it, or maybe he ignored it. He leaned further into the car, looking for any sign of a driver. That's when I saw something glint on the passenger seat. Keys, still in the ignition. If the car broke down, why would the keys be there? Why would both doors be wide open? I grabbed Ryan's arm. "We're leaving." Now for once, he didn't argue. Maybe he finally felt it too, that invisible pull telling us we weren't welcome. We backed away slowly, eyes darting between the woods and the car. I kept waiting for someone to step out, for a face to appear in the darkness. But nothing happened. We got back into Ryan's Chevy, slammed the doors, and he threw it into drive. Gravel spat out under the tires as we sped down the road. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The music stayed off. The night outside felt sharper, dangerous, like the whole forest was watching us. When Ryan finally broke the silence, his voice was shaky. "You saw the shoe, right? That wasn't just me?" "Yeah," I said, my mouth was dry. "And the noise. Someone was in those woods." He nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. You think it was some kind of trap?" The word sat heavy between us. Trap. I didn't answer. We didn't go to the quarry that night. We didn't stop anywhere. He drove me straight home, and I didn't sleep a second. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that empty car, the open doors, the shoe on the ground. The next day, I convinced myself it wasn't as bad as it felt. Maybe a family had car trouble. Maybe they got a ride and forgot their shoe. Maybe the noise was just an animal. I told myself those things until I almost believed them, almost. But then I found out what happened. A week later, Ryan called me, his voice hushed, urgent. "Turn on the news," he said. There it was, a report about a missing woman last seen near the old quarry road. Her car? A pale blue sedan? 80s model. License plate matched. The anchor mentioned something else, too. When police found the vehicle, both doors were open, keys in the ignition, one shoe left behind. I felt sick. My entire body went numb. Authorities said they believed she had been abducted, possibly while stopping for a breakdown. They asked for tips from anyone who might have been on that road. Ryan and I didn't tell them we'd been there. I don't know why. Maybe we were scared of being dragged into it, or maybe we didn't want to admit how close we'd come. For months afterward, I kept checking updates, waiting to hear she'd been found safe, but she never was. Her case went cold like so many others. The police never said anything about suspects, no arrests, just silence. And me? I couldn't stop replaying that moment, standing by her car, feeling the weight of the woods around me, knowing deep in my bones that someone had been there watching us. If Ryan had stepped further into those trees, would he have disappeared too? If we'd lingered for just a few more minutes, would there have been 2 names added to that missing persons list instead of 1? It's been years now, but the end of every summer still carries that same uneasy chill. I can't drive down that road anymore. I can't even look at an old blue sedan without feeling my stomach turn. Sometimes late at night I wonder about her. About what really happened in those woods, about who was hiding there waiting for the next person to stop. And the worst part, I wonder if one day I'll pass another car pulled over, doors open, hazard lights off. I wonder if I'll keep driving, or if some part of me will make the same mistake again, stepping into a scene I was never supposed to see. That's the thing about horror in real life. It doesn't always announce itself with screaming or chasing or footsteps behind you. Sometimes it's just a quiet night, a friend's car, and a choice you don't realize is dangerous until it's too late. For me, the end of summer will never feel like freedom again. It feels like a warning, because I know